finish setting it up here, Thomas, and then I'll do a quick bio and we'll jump right into it.
Okay. I'll just wait for you to hear from you.
Okay, sounds good.
So, I forgot that I don't have my laptop yet. So I'm going to hit the thing. You do the bio.
Okay.
And I'll go grab it. Okay?
Sure.
All right.
If whatever you want. All right, so tonight we've got Thomas B. Roberts, the PhD, back in the studio. He's a professor emeritus at Northern Illinois University and a former visiting scientist at Johns Hopkins, and he's the co-editor of the Psychedelic Medicine and author of Psychedelic Horizons. He's wrote a few books, and he's actually been on the show before back, and we just realized it was so far. It's back in 2014 when I believe we talked about spiritual growth with entheogens, and we want to talk about his new book. Just came out. It's called Mind Apps, the Multi-State Theory and Tools for Mind Design. So, yeah, thanks for coming on the show again, Thomas.
Well, this is what I most enjoy talking about, so thanks for giving me a chance.
Oh, yeah, no problem. And, you know, it's funny because we wanted to thank you for coming on when we were barely a show. Like, I think Darren was saying you were our 47th show back in 2014. So
I think we had about 300 listeners at that time.
Yeah.
300 or 400 listeners. So thanks for taking a chance on us.
Yeah.
Good.
So, yeah, interesting book.
Now we have 302.
Yeah.
Oh, you're listen, you're growing. Maybe it'll make 303 if you're lucky.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right.
Yeah, no, we're happy with the way things have gone. We're very happy. So, yeah, it was an interesting book. I read your Mind Apps book. I think you were probably in the genesis of that because I think we had talked about Mind Apps a bit in our show 5 years ago. So now it's become a book. But I think before we get into that, it's probably worth, you've got decades of experience in the psychedelic world and you've been speaking at all kinds of conferences for years. So I think it's probably worth just a little bit of a background for people if you want to go over that. And then we can kind of jump more into the Mind Apps part.
Okay. Where would you like me to start?
Well, I think,
or intellectual?
Yeah, maybe a little bit of biographical, and then maybe about how how the book came about as well.
Okay. Well, I was born in Syracuse, New York in 1938, and then moved to Connecticut in 1946. And basically, I consider Storrs, Connecticut my home. I went to Hamilton College in Clinton, New York, and then worked for a while in New York City, writing some business and financial newsletters, and then traveled in the West and Northwest, and finally went back to the University of Connecticut in 1967 to work in the financial aid office. Then I got a master's there in education. In 67, I went to Stanford, and I got a doctorate in education at Stanford in 72. And it was really at Stanford where I really picked up my main interest in psychedelics.
Right.
I had my first experience in 1970 at Lake Tahoe.
Right.
What kind of experience?
Then, it was very pleasant. My approach to psychedelics is not so much artistic or psychotherapeutic as it raises a lot of intellectual questions for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in that aspect of psychedelics, which I think has been underdeveloped, because it had all kinds of questions come up, not only about what the experience is and how you can use them, but perspectives on lots of different problems. And in the book, I try to go over some of the fresh problems that psychedelics arise and the perspectives that they give us on them. So basically, that's my take on them. Of course, most people are now interested in psychotherapy, and that should be the beginning because it's helping people who are in trouble and having problems.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I'm interested in what they say about the human mind and how we can develop our minds.
Yeah.
So, if these things can be used to develop our minds, which I tend to agree with you there, do you think they could have played a role in our mind's development to its current state?
I expect they probably have, although I don't hold on the theory that psychedelics are largely responsible for our cognitive development, although they almost certainly were had a hand in it. I think probably they're sort of one tributary among lots of others. For example, every month or two, people find some sort of psychedelic results in some archaeological site, maybe in southern, what used to be southern Russia or northern Peru and so forth. So people are discovering that our ancestors, that human ancestors, use all kinds of different psychedelics. It'd be fascinating to know what they actually thought of them. Unfortunately, there's no real way to find out. I wish there were.
Yeah, there's more and more of those. I always thought, I grew up thinking there was only a few, like peyote and LSD and mushrooms and ayahuasca, but now, we're finding so many.
No, man, these dudes are finding a way, man.
Yeah, they're all finding a way. Yeah.
Well, there's an example of people who become interested in not only psychedelics but other psychoactive plants and techniques are asking those questions now about questions that have been on topics that have been around for a long time. Like archaeologists are now asking the question, what psychoactive plants did these people use and how did they use them? So this is an example of psychedelics opening a whole realm of questions and people looking at things from a new way. For example, there's some, as you probably know, there's some good research now that shows in ancient Greek that mysteries used the psychedelics, but now they're also looking at them in ancient Rome and so forth. So people are adding a whole new series of questions they're asking, like where do psychedelics or other psychoactive plants and techniques fit into various cultures? So all of our sort of anthropological research is getting richer because of that.
Yeah.
Well, it's like alcohol ultimately is a psychoactive brew.
Oh, yes.
And that's just sort of the Western culture sort of won that one out. And they just like overwhelmed the fucking place with it. I could see alcohol could have its place in a nice mixture of concoctions. You know what I mean? Where it's not just getting abused on every street corner and the pubs or, just like totally not used for any, because I was actually having that conversation with someone a couple of weeks ago about how, because I haven't had any alcohol in a long time, and I can notice now that I'm sort of, I don't know, maybe I'm on the other side, maybe I'm not, but I can kind of look back and see, I miss sort of that glass of wine that could sort of lube things up a little bit, when you have to have an awkward conversation or, what does that sort of add to your inhibitions or take away from your inhibitions in some ways?
Yes, I wonder. Let's imagine our ancestors like 8,000 years ago, and they're storing corn and it gets wet and then it ferments. What would they possibly have thought? Being the first people to taste alcohol, it must have been just really magical to them.
Yeah.
It was probably held with a lot of reverence, like all the other ones. We just sort of look. It's hard to see that these days, but I could see it as being, sort of that same sort of held with some reverence, like we see with the other indigenous cultures and the ayahuasca and other things.
That's kind of what I was going to say. Is it'd be interesting to know how powerful and important these things were if they were really to have them ceremonially or with lots of reverence. Like we're starting to get to that point now, I think, with all the all the stuff that you talk about in your book, all the therapeutical uses and the spiritual uses. But it's taken us a long time to get there. But imagine how powerful it was with cultures that took it seriously.
Yeah.
Yes, and in ancient Greece, they had what we call symposia, which were a bunch of just sitting around discussing things, and they would use wine and then add herbs to it, so that these what we think of now as symposia as being a sort of stuffy academic people getting together. At that time, they were getting high on all kinds of different psychoactive plants.
Yeah, that's funny. So what made you go from all this to the mind app and the multi-state theory?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, my ideas sort of grow over time, and there's no real beginning when suddenly I say, oh, my idea started right here. But as I was studying psychedelics, of course, then a question I always ask, and I find it worthwhile asking, is the thing I'm looking at is an example of what larger group, what larger class of things. So when I look at psychedelics, of course, then that's the thing is, well, what about other psychedelics, or what about other psychoactive plants and so forth? And then going from there, what about other ways of altering our consciousness, or I'd like to say mind-body state? Well, there's breathing and prayer and yoga and exercise routines and things that are coming along like brain cranial stimulation and all these things that are happening. I'm suddenly realizing that these are all part of a large group of the things that I call mind apps. So looking at psychedelics as one class of mind apps had me ask the question, what are other kinds? And then that's where the idea of mind app comes in. As rather than just talking about psychedelics, I want to see psychedelics as part of a much larger view of the human mind, one that includes all these other techniques of, as I like to think of, installing mind apps in our brain-mind complex. And of course, new ones are being imported. Ayahuasca and ibogaine are recent examples, and they're being invented in the medical community because whenever anyone discovers something about the human brain, although they don't go in this direction, it's possible to think this is a mind app that may have some use in being installed in our brain-mind complex, and we may be able to do different useful things in that state. So what I want to do is widen people's perspective so that they see psychedelics as just one family among a lot of other families of ways of using our brain-mind complex.
Yeah.
So that's the big idea in that book.
Right. And then you also have a couple other terms in there that are worth going over, like mind body as opposed to consciousness. So can you explain why you tried to simplify consciousness into a term like mind body?
Yeah. Okay. The word consciousness is confusing because different people use it in different ways. And I'm trying to specify one particular way that I use it in my book. For example, we when we're awake in the morning and we're unconscious at night, we say we're conscious now. Or we may think of consciousness as being self-aware in philosophy. Someone is conscious if one can think and think about one's own thinking. And in politics and sociology, consciousness means the thoughts and ideas one has because of one's place in society. And of course, there's Charles Tart's idea of altered states of consciousness. And because the word consciousness is so confusing and people are talking together, they think they're talking about the same thing, but they're actually using one word in a lot of different ways. So for my specific way, I'm stipulating when I use mind-body state, I mean something like Charlie Tart's altered state of consciousness. That is a different combination of the way we're thinking and feeling and behaving. Now, I'm not saying that consciousness is a bad word to use, but I'm just saying that for my particular book, I'm stipulating instead of using the word consciousness, which would be ambiguous, I'm using the word mind-body state instead. And of course, what the mind apps do is produce these different mind-body states, so that those ideas fit together.
Right. So did you worry at all about that coming across a bit too materialistic, like mind-body being kind of almost taking the metaphysical aspect of consciousness out of it?
No, I don't think it does at all, because the metaphysical experiences, I'm interested particularly in mystical experiences, are one of the things that are produced. And we get to ask the question, how does what we're interested in vary from mind-body state to mind-body state? So much, how does perception differ? How does thinking differ? How does perception, or how does mystical experiences differ? So we'll get to ask that question of every mind-body state, and this will give us a much wider, completer view of what we can do with the human mind. Now, I don't see consciousness as something that exists on its own, and I'm a little odd feeling about that, because some people whose ideas I really admire see consciousness as a primary quality in the universe. And I just can't figure that. It doesn't feel right to me. And I'm thinking that may be a problem in my way of thinking about things. For example, Stan Grof sees consciousness as being a primary quality in the universe, like time, space, and matter, and so forth.
Yeah.
I just can't grasp that. And so I'm not against that. I'm just saying that it's something that, it's like I don't understand the word quantum. Okay, so basically I don't use it.
Right. So when it comes to out of body type experiences, for to put all that stuff, like that extended consciousness stuff in a category, like NDEs, out of body stuff, astral travel, maybe even certain. I don't know if lucid dreaming would fall into that, but how is that? How you incorporate that into all these mind apps? Is that they can all be a part of all of these?
Yeah, for example, we can ask what mind apps will produce an out-of-body experience. In fact, I had one during psychedelic experience once.
Oh, okay.
So I know that can be had. I was driving along with a friend of mine, and we were both tripping. We shouldn't have been driving in a car at the time, but we were. And I was afraid he was going to run into the car in front of us. Now, actually, there was quite a bit of space. And suddenly, I was projected probably 50, 60, 70 yards above the car and could look down on it from a perspective. And I could see that there was enough distance between us and the car in the front. And so, immediately I thought, what's going on here? And I was suddenly back in the car again. But I've had that experience. So the question is, are some of these things that we think are rare or impossible that way because we only look in our default ordinary mind-body state? But if we get into other mind-body states, some of these things that we think are rare and impossible are in those other states. So there's a whole way to approach those unusual things that, parapsychological events and so forth, by saying they may happen more often in other mind-body states. And that's why they're so hard for us to study, because we try studying them in our ordinary state, but that's not where they exist, or they don't very often.
Right.
So this raises the possibility that all those odd and mysterious things that don't happen very often, maybe just because they don't happen in an ordinary state. But if we go to other states, we may be able to find them and describe them and develop them.
Thank goodness you weren't projected through the windshield.
Yeah, right. Oh, hypnosis is an example of that. And we know that in hypnosis, people do things that we don't do in an ordinary state.
Right.
Okay. And for a while, people were saying, well, people are just lying or drunk or something in hypnosis. Now know that those events happen, and we see that they're located in hypnotic states. So some of these other odd things that people are curious about or don't believe in might happen in other states. Now, that doesn't mean that everything might happen somewhere. There clearly will be things that we imagine might happen that were probably just imaginary. But we really won't know until we ask the question, how do these exist, or do these exist in other mind-body states? So all these areas then become open for research, and people who are interested in these odd and unusual abilities then start looking at other mind-body states for them, see if they can find them there and develop them.
Mm. So have you been able to map these things out? Like there was a part in your book where you talked about the connected brain and psilocybin, and it shows that, there's these parts of your brain that show an increased connection on psilocybin, which has the potential to actually like increase IQ possibly because there's more, there's more information or there's more processing or something. But
I think it helps you get out of dualistic thinking too.
What do you mean by that?
Well, let me get into the intelligence thing. If we look at intelligence, there are a couple ways to look at this way. One is that there may be different types of intelligence in different mind-body states. And we see this sort of when we see coaches getting team worked up, to play,
right.
Or people who are performers who sort of get into the flow and get things done.
Yeah.
They're getting different mind-body states, and their abilities are stronger in those states. So there's a question of how does any particular ability increase from mind-body state to mind-body state, and this includes intelligence. Now, another approach to intelligence is that A, a person is considered intelligent according to the number of different things that person can do with his or her mind. Okay, the bigger the mental repertoire, the more intelligent the person is. And every one of those mind-body states presents us with possibilities of developing those states, which would be increase our repertoire. So we would be able to have different kinds of intelligence in different mind-body states. And now, getting back to our ordinary state, problem solving is a good example of that. And Jim Fadiman's work from the 1966, in fact, goes back to that far, from people who were working on professional problems and couldn't get them solved, had psychedelic experiences, and then tried looking at the problems from within the psychedelic experience. So they solved the problems within the psychedelic state. Now, probably what this does is, in our ordinary state, certain parts of the brain are connected to each other. But when we get into these other mind-body states, different connections are made. So the different connections allow us to think differently and have different insights into things. So that is increasing intelligence by allowing us to increase our repertoire of mind-body states by increasing the connections within our brains. There's a beautiful illustration of this. I have it in the book, but the best ones are online. It comes from Imperial College in London, where they show two circles, one of what parts of the brain connect with each other in our ordinary state, which ones connect in psilocybin. And the psilocybin, you see a lot more connections. Now, when I looked at that diagram, I got it wrong. I thought that there were more connections in the psilocybin state than in the ordinary state. They're the same number, but instead of just sort of talking to themselves, they start talking, they talk less within their own sort of frame, like within visual or within bodily stuff. And they use the same number of connections, but they connect to different parts of the brain. And this is a fascinating thing because that study compares the ordinary state with the psilocybin state. But every other drug and every other mind-body state, every other mind-body state would have its own diagrams. So there's an enormous area to look at here.
Yeah.
For people to make all these new diagrams.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Like each state could have its own diagrams, and you could start to pick and choose a recipe of states to increase what you want, or intelligence at least, or.
Yes, that's right. Well, you're mentioning recipes takes me to my favorite idea, which I call mind design. And the end part of the book is tools for mind design. Because for the most part, with some exceptions, people use one mind-body technique at a time. Or produce one mind state. But we can put them together in combinations and produce new mind-body states that have never been produced before. And where that will take us, who knows? It's a bit like chemistry, where you can put all these chemicals together in new molecules and come up with new substances that have never been produced before. Now, most of them in chemistry, and I think most of our mind-body states are just going to be curiosities. But a few of them, just like chemistry, may come up with things that are going to be enormously helpful.
Yeah.
And so it's possible to use all these different mind apps in different recipes. Not only that, but every mind app can be used to greater or lessen power, like a little bit of LSD or a lot of LSD or a modest amount, or different types of meditation, doing a lot, doing a little combined with something else. So the number of recipes is, for all practical purposes, unlimited.
Yeah.
That means our mind is unlimited.
Yeah. Like what about meditating on psilocybin or breathing or doing, you can combine all these kinds of things.
So, yes, that's exactly right. Right.
Yeah.
So did I understand that as the psilocybin specifically is using the existing neural pathways more than the other psychedelics are? Like,
I don't know a comparison with our psychedelics, but in the two diagrams, the first one is actually just salt water for ordinary state, and then in psilocybin, different parts of the brain connect with each other that normally are not connected. There aren't new. There's the same number of connections, but they sort of drop some of the old connections and then use them to plug into new places.
Right, right.
I wonder if it's always the same ones.
Sorry?
I wonder if it's always the same ones. Like, I wonder if, like, you know, X13 always goes to B12 or, you know, whatever, however they figure out where they're going. But, you know, like if the same ones always interchange or if it's random somehow. It fluctuates.
It's probably, well, I wouldn't call it random, but it'll depend on the mind-body app that's being used. And that we just don't know. I mean, this is an enormous area to be investigated. And what I'm hoping one of the results of my book was to get people interested in looking at these new questions that come along. Like there's general agreement that meditation and psychedelics go well together. But of course, the different types of psychedelics and the different doses, different types of meditation, and different ways of combining them. So even there, the number of recipes would be huge. But anyway, meditation and psychedelics seem to be one of the natural pairs that look going to be productive.
Do you notice a difference between the natural substances like psilocybin compared to the chemically created ones like LSD?
In terms of personal experience, no, I don't. There's a question of whether naturally occurring substances are better to use than lab substances.
Yeah.
And I'm split on that one, because I think a problem with plants, of course, is that what they produce depends on their growing season and the water and the amount of sun and the nutrients, and so you got this huge variation with plants. In the labs, you don't get it. So in a lab, you get a pure sample. On the other hand, in the lab, you don't get all those adjacent chemicals that plants produce. Like marijuana has something like over 200 and maybe over 400 different plant chemicals in it. And so if we take THC, you're just using one of those chemicals. But it may be there's all kinds of interactions that go on. Well, there certainly are all kinds of interactions. And so both of these approaches have their advantages. With a lab, you know exactly what you've got and you know how strong it is. With the plant, you've got all these other interacting chemicals that confuse the issue, but may actually be healthier or may produce actually different mind-body states from the pure chemical one. So I don't see that we have to choose one or the other. Each person sort of doing what he or she particularly likes. But to have a complete view, what we need to consider is all possibilities: the lab, pure lab, and the natural plant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we shouldn't omit either one.
There definitely could be a synergy between the different stuffs in the mushroom compared to just pure psilocybin or something like that.
Yes. There's something like either 140 or 180 different psilocybin mushrooms, too. And they're in all those variables. Yeah.
I think I've only tried like one.
Liberty caps? I mean,
Whatever.
that's the one. That's the one that we used to have all the time.
Rampant in Canada.
Yeah. Huh. So speaking of psilocybin, it must be interesting for you being involved in especially in the psychedelic, well, the whole movement and the culture for decades, really, and seeing the media creation of the psychedelic narrative like shape it back in the 70s and 80s, and now we've come so far that
Denver decriminalized, baby.
Yeah, psilocybin's been decriminalized in some. I mean, that's a huge start.
Yes, I'm ambivalent about that. I think that psychedelics should be taken within some sort of social context, health or religion or intellectual. And
what about initiation?
Yes, some sort of structure, social structure. And there are some people that I think should not do psychedelics except under a therapeutic situation.
Yeah. And
I'm afraid that they will get into doing them and cause all kinds of problems. The sort of thing that happened in the 60s. I don't want to see that happen. On the other hand, I don't want to restrict people from doing them. So I think we need some sort of social context to allow people to try either try psilocybin and other psychedelics, but to be screened and see if there's someone who should take it on their own or if they should take it with, let's say, with a psychotherapist.
Yeah,
because a psychotherapist can help you through. And we don't need a bunch of crazy people running around.
Yeah, that's a tough choice because or a tough situation because you don't want to limit people's freedom. They should have sovereignty over their own consciousness in that respect. But it is a risk that it'll kind of get out of control. But that's one of the reasons why I think it needs to be.
Well, I'd rather have that out of control than meth, I think.
Yeah, how out of control can mushrooms get? Really,
Yeah.
I mean, compared to all the other drugs that are rampant. I mean. The pharmaceutical companies, how many billion? 68 billion?
76 billion fucking opioid pills.
So, I mean, it can't get much worse than that. I mean, if everybody was doing psilocybin instead, it'd probably be a way better place.
The back might still hurt.
But having said that, it's that's one of the reasons why I think it needs to be, the stigma needs to be taken off and things need to be, and that's probably, why you're advocating so much more research, because if we could educate people on the benefits but also the risks that in a way that the media won't do right now with anything, it would be very helpful.
Yeah, of course. Even if we put out lots of accurate information, there are enough irrational people who won't follow it.
Yeah.
I don't know of anything that we humans haven't abused.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm including like money and food, and I mean, it's just. Some of us are bound to abuse anything or everything. And we have to kind of keep the abuse down to as little as we can get away with. And that's the problem I see, because I do want it to make it available. On the other hand, there are people who will get into trouble using it, just like there are people who get into trouble by abusing alcohol or money or driving a car.
Yeah.
Humans abuse things.
And each other.
That's right. Yeah. We just have to do whatever we can to keep that down and to keep the good use up. And of course, now when you get into the area of religion, this gets become really complicated, because who has the right to tell me or anybody else what I can or cannot do in my own religion?
Yeah.
So for most people, most of the time, probably psychedelics work all right, but for some people, it would not be good, and yet that would mean infringing on freedom of religion. Okay, so that I think that's the hardest nut to crack. Intellectual stuff will be kind of hard, but freedom of religion will be even harder.
Yeah. Speaking of religion, we have a question for you from the chats. Is there a difference to you as far as metaphysical versus religious experiences go? Or sorry, mystical versus religious. There
are, to me, there are religious or spiritual versus religious. Maybe
that's probably more of what he means.
Okay. Yes, it's hard to tell. I think that certainly there are spiritual experiences that are not mystical. Although I think that mystical experiences, all or almost all, are spiritual.
Yeah.
For example, a spiritual experience could include, let's say, seeing an angel. And mystical experiences are defined by subjective qualities of what the person experiences. It doesn't include, for example, seeing an angels or gods or that sort of thing. So those would be spiritual or religious experiences, but I wouldn't call them mystical. Now, the problem, of course, is the word mystical and spiritual and religious are used in lots of confusing ways. So this isn't a nice, clear line in the sand, but in my own thinking, I prefer to use the word mystical to talk about the experiences that have those particular characteristics, either 5 or 7, depending on how many you use. And to use religious to talk about organizations like this church or that church or some other, and spiritual to talk about a sort of feeling of sacredness that may be mystical or may not be mystical.
Yeah.
But that's my particular use of them.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about, do you have any questions, Darren, on that? Or?
I just want to figure out the other 126 kinds of mushrooms here. P.O. box people.
Well, soon there'll be a little, you can go into a deli and you'll be able to choose them all.
Oh yeah, we could do a cack in Denver, a mushroom cack. You mind chaperoning?
No, thanks. Do you want to talk about how you have a chapter in here about psychedelics saving the humanities?
Yeah, this is something one of the things I'm trying to do is to interest people in psychedelics who are not ordinarily interested in them. So psychotherapists now are very definitely interested. There's no question there.
Yeah.
Okay. The people in the humanities are not very interested. I'm trying to show them the psychedelics can enrich their fields a lot unless they'll get into them. The humanists in the humanities sense are very wary of things that might interfere with their jobs. A lot of university people in the humanities are in a kind of weak place right now, and they don't want to do anything that might interfere with their own jobs, and that's very understandable. But I'm particularly interested in the fact that the humanities, in a number of different perspectives, can use and talk about psychedelics. My favorite probably is Stan Groff's view of the human mind. And I have a whole chapter on Stan Groff.
Mm-hmm.
And he has developed a map of the human mind, which I think is maybe the richest one I know. And we can use it to interpret movies and plays and so forth. It's too complicated to go into right now. He sees 4 different levels with different kinds of subjective experiences on each level. And those help us understand arts and movies and plays and so forth.
Yeah, like getting to the level of like the first level of that is like going back and remembering through these states, remembering your birth and stuff, right? Or trauma that goes to before your normal memory.
Yes. Now there's a very hot item where people disagree, because when he was first mentioning this, everybody quote knew it was impossible to remember your birth.
Yeah. And
yet Groff kept on running into his patients who had experiences that they claimed were birth experiences, and he went back and checked them out. Since then, there is a professional area called pre and perinatal psychology, and it's developed basically with the idea that neonatal experiences and birth experiences affect us. They're sort of like a sub-basement of our personalities. Now, it's easy to understand if we talk about some sort of chemical that affects the fetus, okay? And this would include that. And, of course, when a pregnant woman goes through a stress, that stress gets transferred to the fetus. And when she has good experiences, that gets transferred. And I suppose that depending on the stage of the fetus at that time, it'll affect the structures in the person's mind and body. But now this whole area of pre and perinatal psychology is opening up, largely but not entirely due to Groff.
And that's people, and that's back to the psychedelics, right? It's not just work on psychotherapy. It's actually through psychedelics, right?
Yes. Some of our problems happen sort of echoes or have roots in the birth experience itself. Depending on the type of birth we have, we're likely to be sort of oriented toward a certain sort of general personality type. Now, since birth, of course, everything that's happened since birth provides a sort of another layer on it. So if the perinatal birth level is sort of the sub-basement, then our experiences are the basement and the stories above that. So it's not always clear, but that our birth experiences may give us tendencies to develop in certain directions.
Well, I wonder
our life experiences develop those.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll get us into the past life thing a little bit better and easier too. Like, is there an overlap with psychedelics and people going beyond birth to even past lives? I mean, there's a lot of evidence now that even that therapy or that hypnosis into past lives, like even recognizing the trauma that you've had in a past life is enough to heal certain phobias and things like that.
Yes, that's one of the areas that psychedelics have helped open up, because beyond more deeper than the perinatal birth level is the transpersonal level, and that would include apparent experiences of earlier lives. Now, the question is, are these actual memories of some sort of previous life, and what is it that got transferred from the previous life to the current life? It clearly isn't the body. Well, so does this mean we have to believe in a soul or some sort of non-material consciousness? That brings up all kinds of wonderful problems, which, as far as I'm concerned, are completely open and unsettled. And yet, in hypnosis, too, people can go back and have and report experiences. Now, the question is the person sort of drawing on unconscious knowledge and sort of producing that as and supposing it was their own personal experience, or is this a real, actual personal experience? And how do we go about determining that? And to make things even more complicated, by the way, whenever you get those questions, is it this or that? A way to approach that question is think sometimes it might be one, sometimes it might be the other, and sometimes it might be a mixture. So suppose in a psychedelic experience of a previous life, it might be a memory of an actual previous life, or it might be a memory plus people picked up from magazines and TV and newspaper. It might be one, it might be the other, it might be a mixture. And if it's a mixture, then that makes it even harder to think about. But that's the position we're in right now. It's for me anyway, it's an unresolved issue that is very complicated. Now, Another way to look at this is, do previous life experiences vary from mind-body state to mind-body state? So maybe there are some mind-body states that have more access to previous life experiences, if that's what they are, than other mind-body states. And psychedelics seem to be one. Hypnosis seems to be some of these. Now, what would happen if we could combine hypnosis with psychedelics? Maybe we'll get an even clearer picture, or maybe it will be a more confused picture. That's one of the questions we have to look at.
Yeah, but I feel like there's enough evidence now that that past life thing is almost a reality, and if not now, it won't take long before there's enough evidence to show that that something is traveling, between lives.
Yes, and what is that thing? And that's the question, right? And that's the big question. What is it that travels from a previous life to the current life? And did it have way stations on the way, maybe going to somewhere else too?
Bits and bytes. Yeah. It's all bits and bytes.
Now, Groff says that our minds are basically able to know and experience everything that is happening and has happened in the past, and I'm not sure about the future. So maybe it's picking out things like, let's say, old radio signals as an analogy. Only these would be some sort of old personality events that was able to pick up and remember. I'm not sure to go. I find that really I'm enough of materials to be really bothered with that, and enough a speculator to say, let's really take a look at it and find out.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe consciousness is just like a virus, just like Agent Smith. It's already in the computers. We're already in the simulation, and we're already uploading. It's just like eking in and out of stuff, and it's just like, oh, poof, forward here.
Well, that's a good analogy. Yeah, I'm not sure where to go with it, but anyway, that suggests that there is some sort of nub that gets transferred somehow.
So then, what happens when you eat a bunch of mushrooms? What's going on then?
I don't have an answer for that. I wish I did.
Yeah.
Do you think if we had enough mushrooms, we could find out?
Maybe. Well, yes, that would certainly give us some evidence. On the other hand, we wouldn't know whether that evidence is evidence of a previous life or whether it's our hope to find previous life calling on things from the unconscious. But
or the Akashic records, or the thing that Groff talks about, it could be calling up some resonance from you know, the
Yes, oh no.
yeah.
And one of the things I really like about psychedelics is they allow us to address all these weird, odd, and important questions freshly and try to look at them in new ways, and not just to say, well, it's just craziness or schizophrenia or imagination. And some of them probably will be. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, we humans do imagine a certain amount of stuff that isn't real. And so how are we going to determine what are sort of our own imagination generating and what is, in a sense, out there somehow?
Yeah.
And how do we determine that?
What is the imagination capable of generating?
That's right. Right.
Into reality.
Yeah, you can't really generate anything without imagination. I mean, everything starts imagining or thinking, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I got a interesting. Oh, go ahead.
This sort of reminds me of the idea that in the sciences and social sciences, it may be possible to develop a systematic way of developing new paradigms. So this is part of the question about both the humanities and the social sciences. And I use the example of Benny Shannon, the cognitive psychologist from Israel who went to Brazil. And as soon as you hear Brazil, you know immediately, ayahuasca comes to mind. And much to his surprise, he had some ayahuasca experiences, which got him thinking very differently about cognitive psychology. And he came up with questions on how cognitive psychology can help understand ayahuasca experiences, and how ayahuasca experiences might contribute to cognitive psychology. So in a sense, what he did is he expanded the paradigm of cognitive psychologists to start to include ayahuasca experiences. And I think that is combining those two is we have to look at it from all our different disciplines. Philosophy especially needs people who are philosophers and can not just think about psychedelics, but have psychedelic experiences and then go back and think about them in our ordinary state.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there is this philosopher, Peter Sjostren H. In England, who's looking at that issue. But for example, our idea. I'm going to say one of my favorite things to get into is this idea that psychedelics intensify our experience. For example, almost everybody who's done psychedelics has sort of had this experience. They thought, this is real. This is really real. This is realer than real. What does it mean to have different degrees of reality? And how is that? How we have to think different about what's real, come to realize we can crank it up and crank it down. I use the word rheostat. We can rheostat reality up and down. And also truth. I mean, people have the idea, this is true. This is really true. This is realer than really true. Okay. And, I mean, you all know those experiences, and same with beauty and same with spirituality and so forth.
Yep.
So what does this say about our minds? Is there some sort of, I mean, a sort of, as an analogy, a sort of rheostat where we can turn this up and turn it down? And if so, then what does it say about those concepts? Is truth like something that's given, or are there different degrees of truth and different degrees of reality, different degrees of beauty? And we can start doing experiments on those to find out. We don't have to just sort of imagine them.
Yeah.
And so all these concepts in the arts and in philosophy are open to experimentation.
Yeah.
And that I see as a real opening.
Yeah, and what does it mean when our minds feel like something is realer than real when you're not in your when you're leaving your body? Like a lot of those examples of people having those, like, you know, experiences of the ultimate oneness or love or reality that's more real than this physical reality, and yet they're out of body or in some sort of astral form. I mean, what does that say about our minds when things are realer when you're not in it, or they could be?
Yes, that question you asked, what does that say about our minds, is exactly, I think, the right question to ask. We can just dismiss it and say, well, it's just craziness and stuff, but that doesn't match the experience that people have.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do we... So psychedelics require us to think differently about a lot of different kinds of things, not just psychotherapy.
They seem to shut some things off in a lot of ways too. Like it's really hard not to be present on a bunch of mushrooms. You know, you're not like worrying about the rent. I mean, or anything. That's my experience of it anyway. It's like for the most part, you're there, you're in the moment, and you're not interested in wandering away from it.
Or what you're going to do.
Whether
like
that's
in September, you're not thinking about,
you're like staring at your hands or whatever the fuck, you know.
Well, of course, I mean, different people have extremely different experiences on psychedelics too. I'll give you an example. From my class, I taught a class on psychedelics, and the first book I would have them read would be Huxley's Doors of Perception. Now, a problem when that came out in 1954 is people read that and they thought the experience that Huxley had is the experience that mescaline produced. But it wasn't. That was Huxley's mind that produced that. And it was a long time before people realized that if they took the same dose, they would not have the same experience Huxley did, because it was their mind that was producing it. And now we know that, and we've made enormous advances because we recognize sort of set and setting as being so important. But when psychedelics were first produced, people didn't know about set and setting.
Yeah.
And so you give it to somebody and you have an experience. You give it to somebody else and have an entirely different experience. Not only that, you give it to the first person again 2 or 3 times and have different experiences. So what good is a drug that's completely unpredictable?
Yeah, some people won't even experience it. I mean, we had a friend in Mexico. I think it was mescaline, actually. Remember, he went down and did the mescaline ceremony. Yeah. He didn't even feel anything hardly. Yeah. It was really underwhelming to him.
I don't have that problem.
Yes, that's exactly right.
But then again, like when I eat mushrooms, I tend to have the same experience to varying degrees. I mean, well, there's a couple different ones. I shouldn't say it's the same experience, but I can fit there's probably like a catalog of 4 or 5 different roads you could end up going down. And they're not exactly the same, but they seem to be quite similar.
Well, who knows what makes them different? I mean, is it your state of being in that week? Is it what you ate? Is it like how tired you are?
Day, yeah. And then there's and then you wonder about things like DMT, where you do get an overwhelming similar experience where you're completely fucking gone. And is that like something where you're so far gone that you're past a couple different layers of that subconscious mind? So you're getting past experience to something more primal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't done DMT, and so everything I hear about it makes me very curious about it.
Yeah. What are you doing next weekend?
Of an age, it wouldn't be good. Well, I'm in my 80s, so I don't think it would be good for my heart, my liver, or my kidneys. But
definitely
to this age, you have to really start thinking that way.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna cross that bridge here this summer.
Pretty soon,
point. Yeah. It's coming.
Darren's gonna.
I watched the Spirit Molecule again the other day, and I'm all gung ho.
Yeah, good. We have to document it for the show for sure, Darren.
Are you gonna chaperone me then?
No. No more chaperoning. No more chaperoning for me.
So there's a recent study in the Psy Post that said of 119 participants found that religious people and those who took psychedelic drugs with religious intent tended to report stronger mystical experiences. So does that insinuate that being religious itself could be a bit of a mind-body app?
Well, certainly it would influence it. I mean, if you start with people who have religious beliefs and experiences, in their ordinary state, they're likely to influence the psychedelic state. And so, also, when they're working in labs, let's say at Johns Hopkins, they use music that is spiritual music. So, of course, it suggests those types of experiences. So another whole direction to go is to use different types of music and find out if to what degree people's experience matches the music or any other input that's put into it. So since set and setting is so important, and we can change the setting very easily. There's a whole bunch of variables to work at. So anyway, I mean, it's just again the whole possibility of things opening up.
Yeah.
Or during their preparation, so they will spend time with the two people who are going to monitor during the session, and the people that they're spending with would intentionally or unintentionally suggest, you might have this type of experience, you might have that type of experience, and that will put the suggestion to the person. So it's a complicated and confusing and very rich area to work in.
So speaking of testing and experiments, what would you, if you had all the money you needed, what would be your ideal hypothetical experiment, do you think?
Well, if I had all money available, I wouldn't use it for an experiment. What I would do is found a department or college within a university that would study different mind-body states, and of course psychedelic and meditative and so on and so forth. So I think this is the real area that has to be opened up.
Right.
And I could imagine they might have a joint appointment with people, obviously from psychology and the biological sciences, but I wanted to include people from the humanities too, so that they would be able to carry information back and forth, both from the joint appointments to the new college and from the college back to the original places. And so this certainly would include experiments, but it might include experiments in philosophy and art and religion and music, as well as psychotherapy. So there'd be actually almost every intellectual discipline has an intersection with psychedelics, one place or another. In my undergraduate classes were drawn from throughout the university, so I had a pretty good sense of what these various departments might be. The only one I had a problem with were some people engineering. Now, chemical engineering, of course, is no problem at all. But in engineering, they tend not to think about the human mind as a variable, except for problem solving. So that they all get into the problem solving aspect of engineering. But how can I use psychedelics to help me design a better whatever?
Yeah.
So that fits them.
Yeah.
But it isn't the same as with psychology or sociology and so forth. But every department could very well have people in this sort of general college of mind-body studies.
Is there any specific study that you would want to do that you've thought about?
Well, yes, I would like to have philosophers get into this. I think they really need it.
Yeah.
Almost all philosophy is a philosophy of an ordinary default mind-body state, and I think other body states they just tend to dismiss or not pay attention to. And now philosophy is supposed to be the love of knowledge, and that includes the love and the knowledge of the human mind. And if they're going to study the human mind fully, they have to discover and investigate it in every mind-body state, not just our ordinary state.
And experiences too.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, they would have to have the experiences and then think about those. Well, two things. One, try to do philosophy in those experiences, which I think might be fun but kind of hard, not very productive. But then looking back, what did I learn about the human mind when I had that experience? And how can I use those insights to understand more about me and life and human mind and so forth?
Yeah.
So I would like to start with philosophers.
Nice. Maybe we should, before we run out of time as well, maybe we should talk about that chapter in your book that you have about the business prospectus, because that's an interesting idea too, is actually kind of, in a way, corporatizing some of this stuff.
Yeah. The way I approach this is the question, how can we expand psychedelics to influence society most efficiently, completely, and then, let's say, quickly.
Positively, too, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I can understand the argument of we don't want to turn it into just a money-making, money-grubbing thing.
Yeah.
That certainly makes sense. But we don't complain if a psychotherapist charges a fee. They're expensive. Research is done at universities may cost anywhere from $17,000 to $20,000 per subject.
Mm-hmm.
That's really expensive. So what I'm thinking of is if we had a business whose service was two kinds of psychedelic sessions. One for psychotherapy for all those things that are developing now, and the third for personal growth. That will include problem solving, religion. As Bob Jesse says, so calls it, he calls the betterment of well people. I think that's a perfect phrase that he's developed. So people would go to the psychotherapy session referred to by a mental health professional who would refer them there, and people could themselves apply to the betterment of personal life themselves. And there would be professionally trained people who could guide the session. First, screen them and prepare them, and guide the session to help with integration. Those 4 steps would have to be there. Now, the question is, would this just turn into some big, General Motors or IBM of psychedelics? It doesn't have to. It could, but for example, a way to get around that would be basically it would be possible for lots of people to open this type of corporation. I'm thinking of a big international one, but it could. But anybody, the psychedelics are not patented, and what's important with the psychedelic is not the drug. That's relatively unimportant and cheap. It's the professional guidance that's important. They would have professionally qualified people to guide people through the experiences, and it would be possible to actually to bring the drug to market is extremely expensive, hundreds of millions, and sometimes almost $1 billion. It has to go through all these very careful steps to be approved of by the FDA, and every new use has to be approved of. Once the safety of the drug has been determined, you still have to try it out in various treatments, and then find out does it really work compared with with a control subject group. So it's very expensive to try a new use for a drug. Now, in order to raise that money, you could raise it in a stock offering and use that money to pay people to do the research. So people like Johns Hopkins and NYU and research and Imperial College and elsewhere will get grants to actually do this research. So this would be a way of speeding up the research. Now, MAPS is working on that Public Benefit Corporation, which is absolutely great. I think that's a fine idea.
Yeah.
The problem is that's for use of MDMA for PTSD. Now, that's one use, but there are all these other uses. So the image that I use, the comparison I use, this is a way of raising a lot of money to pay for the research has to be done. Not only that, when you start to sell stock to the public, there are enough people who are interested in making money. They ask themselves, not am I interested in a psychedelic experience, but can I make money in this? And they start to then look at the research that you and I and our colleagues know about. Mm-hmm. And they read all this research that's been done, and they think, oh, this is a way of educating the financial, banking, and insurance industries, because they're interested in it for the wrong reason. And hopefully they will get along eventually for the right reason. Another possibility is when the stock is for sale, require that somebody who buys it, let's say if they buy 200 shares, they have to donate 100 shares to some eleemosynary institution like a school or a hospital or something. Yeah, right, exactly. So that these nonprofit public benefit corporations will end up owning a lot of the corporation. And the analogy I use is we look at beer. There are these big international beer companies like Constellation, Modelo, and they have beer like all over the world. And then there are regionals. Well, I was going to say Molson, but Molson is now getting international too. But you understand what I mean. There are regionals and national, like Kurz and Molson and so forth.
Crafts.
And then there are local ones. And there are a lot of individual brew houses, craft brews that are being built. So I'd say work on the same level with psychedelics. There might be these big international psychedelic organizations, and then some local regional ones, and then also some particular doctors or priests or whoever they might be might set up their local parallel to the craft brew industry. So they'd be like craft psychedelic. Then people who wanted treatment could decide, where do I want to go? What fits in with the way I feel things ought to work.
Hmm.
So we shouldn't be stuck on just one way of offering psychedelics, but have a whole range so people could choose what they want.
Yeah, and including, I guess, addiction therapy would be in there too. I mean, there's always the risk of addiction through psychedelics as well. But I mean, there's a lot of benefits to the therapy. So would that fall under one of the two categories of psychotherapy or improvement? Or?
Sure. Well, people who are addicted would, and it could be alcohol, it could be opium, it could be, actually, I would say it could be money, although some people wouldn't say that. Would go to the psychotherapy division, okay, and they would be referred there by mental health professionals. So they would go to see a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist who say, "I think you need this type of therapy, so I will refer you to there."
Right. So we just fall under that. Yeah. I mean,
I would imagine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would imagine they would be residential. Beautiful natural scenes. Places.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're losing that battle to addiction. I mean, right now there's more things to addict us. There's the phones and the food and the sex and the video games and the gambling. I mean, it's just it's not even
76
hard drugs.
billion opiate pills.
Yeah. So I mean,
I can see this being.
I can see this type of thing working. This corporate thing that'll just bring it more into our consciousness and allow people to have this place to go. I mean, it's really, I can see in the next 5-10 years, it's going to be a huge part for
can't keep the lid on it.
The best addiction therapies right now, they're like 5-10% success rate is not good. So,
jeez, I think that.
But I think Ibogaine has good rumors going along around that. That needs to be more systematically studied.
Yeah, it's like 80%, I think they say, some of those.
Yeah. Now, there's an example of an area that should be funded.
Right.
Okay. But you can only be so much money by appealing to people. Although, some people have been very generous to MAPS, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. But there's more money than you can raise just by asking people. But if you think people might be able to actually make money off it, which is kind of a gross way of saying it, but that attracts people to a field.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I'm looking at my computer and my pants. These all come from big corporate stuff.
Yeah,
I didn't make my own computer or weave my own cloth.
Yeah.
I can't even use Linux because it fucking sucks. Well, before we let you go, I got to read this comment from the live stream.
Okay.
It's from listener. I don't know how long he's been listening. He's listened long enough. I've seen him around quite a few times. It's from Mason Lord. And he says, "Yo, Dr. Roberts helped me design an independent study with a neurologist we called Foundations of Psychedelic Studies based on his course. Thank you all tremendously."
Oh, wonderful.
How
delightful.
And he said, "I would help
you."
By
the way, I hope
go ahead.
people will start offering psychedelic courses. That really needs to be done. And they're fun courses to teach, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
We should do an online one. We could do it on Udemy. And he says, "I would help you guys have professionals in the mental health field offer psychedelic harm reduction and help chaperone your Denver CAC event."
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Uh-oh. See? Got to watch those daydreams.
Yeah.
Even saying the wrong thing can start problems. But they're always fun problems for the most part. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, thanks. I enjoyed talking with you. And as I said before, let me know when it's online so I can pass the word along.
You bet. We will.
Yeah, it's great talking to you again.
And we'll put links to your new book in the show notes and all that. And you've got a page.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. I'm glad.
Yeah.
A problem with it is that the publisher is not one that has a lot of status. And I'm trying to talk to people who are intellectuals and professionals, and I'm afraid that, I'll have a problem with that.
Yeah.
So if any links you can be would be very helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, will do.
We'll spread it as far as we can. Yeah, and let's not wait 5 years next time.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas.
Not even half that.
Okay. Take care.
Bye, Tom.
Bye.
And that was a chat. Dr. Tom Roberts, Mind Apps, Multi-State Theory, and Tools for Mind Design. And, of course, if you want to check out our last chat with Dr. Tom, check out episode 47. Came back out April 2014.
Tell us about a year in that.
That was would have been 10 months. Yeah, 10 months in.
Yeah.
Thinking about quitting.
Wow. Where? Yeah.
I don't know.
No.
We're still in the spare bedroom at that time.
It's good. I like these conversations where the book makes more sense after talking to the guests. You know, I was reading it and it was a bit hard for me to grasp at first, but I feel better now.
That's all right. Way to grasp it, bud. It's been a while since you went psychonaut, and that probably makes a difference too.
What? Me?
Yeah.
There's nothing to do with this.
It helps.
I'm trying the other states in that book.
For me, it's been just a few weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, no, a couple months now. Me and Joey talking, though. We're going to go deep. Deep.
Nice.
We had a chaperone.
I'm doing Big C5 this weekend. Oh, actually, by the time this comes out, I'll be back, so we won't talk about it. We'll save it for an intro.
We'll save it? Are you going out to the medicine wheel yet?
No, we might stop there on the way back.
In the middle of the night? Or no, you're camping
on
out?
Sunday. There's a double camp night.
Ooh. Party on. It's exciting. Exciting times. Big thanks, Tom, for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you're one of the few people who do choose to support the show. GoAmerica.ca/support. Head over there today. Sign up for monthly. We got Patreon. We got Stripe. We got PayPal. All those things are great. Sign up for a monthly. It helps us pay the bills, helps us grow, helps us chase down the mainstream, and do what we can. GoAmerica.ca/support. And there's a bunch of other stuff in the show notes. Review the show, share the show, tell your friends about this motherfucker. Sign up for the newsletter. I think there's only like 500 people signed up for the newsletter, so we could do better there. Anything else?
No, that's about it.
Leave us a voicemail.
Check
I fixed the phone.
me out on Instagram and you out on Twitter.
I fixed the phone. The
Did you?
studio phone.
You were gonna buy mine off me.
It was $80, and you were like leaning towards 250.
Yeah. Well,
You want to give out the number?
what's the number? The number is 403-702-6083.
So shoot us a text, leave us a voicemail, send us some cash, send us some good vibes, send some good vibes to your neighbors. Be kind to each other. Join the chats. GoAmerica.ca/chats. Other than that, thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. Bingo bango. All right. Thanks for tuning in live.
And we'll be back soon.
We'll be back soon with
Alberta Sasquatch and Mountain Beast Mysteries.
We'll be talking Squatch.
And other stuff, I'm sure.